Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to HomeGames on this lovely, lovely July afternoon, or at least it's lovely in Edinburgh. I hope it's lovely where you are. There are some topics that I suppose we'd better not talk about today because I just get myself into trouble, as I proved on Sunday night, asking what I thought were entirely innocent questions, but apparently not. But we do have lots more interesting things to talk about, and I'm joined by Dan Marsh and Sam Handfield-Jones of Seccl. How you doing, gents?
Very good, Mark. Thank you for having us. Thank you.
You are very, very welcome. And Seccl, as I'm sure most of you know, is a custodian and a platform. But what's special about it, other than the lovely people, is that it offers advisors the chance to operate their own platform. And that's going to be the heart of our subject today. So we're going to get properly into that. As ever with HomeGames, the chat is open. You're welcome to ask Sam and Dan anything you like at any point. There are two ways that you can do that if you don't know this already. One is through the chat here. And one is through the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. And that is a great way to ask a question because we definitely see it. And sometimes we miss things in the chat. Little bit of housekeeping. It'll be 45 minutes as it usually is. And Sam and Dan are on a hard stop. So we've got to get properly done and out by 1:15 so that they've got time to go to the loo and stuff before their next thing, which is so important. And if you are, as ever, having any audio visual issues, then I'm popping a little link in the chat bar there, and that will sort those out for you in, I'm reliably informed now, 78.9% of cases. So that's all good then. Busy day for platforms as well. We've got an announcement from Premium this morning that its Australian parent is going to put that up for sale. It's not entirely unexpected, perhaps, for if you've seen some of the earlier news. So corporate activity not finished in the space yet, and platforms remains a kind of pretty fun place to make a living. Lots and lots of stuff going on. So enough out of me, other than to say I've got one little favor to ask, and everyone will roll their eyes probably, but if you are an advisor or a paraplanner or indeed an admin in an advisor firm and you're watching this, there is a green button at the bottom of your screen, and I would love it after the session if you would click that button and spend just 3 or 4 minutes telling us how the platforms that you use are doing. It's been a really key quarter for that, with lots of stuff going on, lots of announcements, and lots of people kind of getting back to work. So we're eager to hear what you think, and we deeply appreciate it. Anybody that fills it out and leaves their details so we know where to send it will get a playback of the results as well. So that's enough nonsense. Sam and Dan, you are extremely welcome. Recovered from any disappointments that you may have had over the weekend, of course. And plying your trade as you do. Well, Sam, you're in London. Dan, I'm not sure where you are.
I'm just down the road from Sam, actually, so we're keeping it local.
You're keeping it local in London. Seccl itself, though, is out of Bath, isn't it?
That's right.
Originally, anyway. So we might talk a little bit about the origins of it. Many people, I mean, we've got lots and lots of people on today, actually. So I suspect quite a lot of people have a kind of inkling what you get up to, but so that everybody's up to speed, can you just give us the 2-minute version of what it is that you do?
Cool. Sam, do you want to take the lead?
More than happy to. Yeah. So Seccl exists to make 2 things happen predominantly. One is to allow advisors to operate their own platform using our technology and using some of the regulatory activities that we do. We invest quite heavily in automation to make the process as simple as possible. And the kind of the philosophy that sits behind that is that advisors should be controlling as much of that client journey as possible. They're best placed to provide the best customer service. But historically, third-party platforms have meant that basically a big chunk of that service provision is out of your control. And by using Seccl, you operate your own platform with the support of our team, and that allows you to kind of truly customize the way the platform works. So not just a logo or a look and feel, but wrapper types, asset universe, usability of the product, people who can access it, scopes, things like that, as well as the look and feel. And of course, you can then use, which we'll touch on, the APIs to connect with third-party tools, but also to extract data in real time. So you can basically have all of the data at your fingertips and the control that comes with that. It's all the same underlying technology, and we also open that up via API. And what that means is people can build bespoke applications on top of it. So when people talk about modular platform services, that's effectively what we do. You can pick and choose which parts to use, but that typically requires an engineering capability within your team. We have seen a couple of advice firms who are building that capability, which to me is super exciting, but you don't have to.
Yes.
It's very much at the sharp edge of the spear, but we're seeing firms, whether it ranges from early stage fintechs or digital banks, or even those outside of financial services, so those like Amazon or others who are interested in embedding wealth management investment services into their existing apps, and they can do so by using our API. But the underlying technology, single code base, and that's used by advisors, it's used by fintechs, it's used by anyone embedding those services. And I think that's kind of a key part of why we exist, which is that technology has been rebuilt from scratch. Dave Harvey, who's the founder and co-CEO with me, deeply passionate about this. And that single code base allows us to be more nimble, more agile. And typically, the key here is lower cost, right? So it's much, much cheaper and easier. The economics of platform ownership are now, we talk about 150 million, which Mark, I'm sure you'll try to kick the tires on today. But that's what we're here to do, help advisors operate their own platform and help anyone embed wealth management into any kind of digital product that they might already have.
Cool. So let's declare a bit of an interest here. So we've got a little bit of work that we've been doing together, gents. So you guys have a paper coming out trying to unpack this sector a little bit more, and we've done some research and some data to try and back some parts of it up. So we'll call that out as we go through as well. And I think we'll be getting that out next Thursday. So eyes peeled, everybody, for Seccl's paper next Thursday. The best bits are the graphs. But I'll share a couple of those as we go through. But loads and loads of interesting stuff in there. And one of the things I suppose in this particular part of the sector, first of all, it's kind of hot right now, right? There's a lot of interest, and lots of people have written good stuff on this. And certainly from the due diligence work that we do, we've been asked to kind of talk about the relative merits and demerits of this quite frequently from people who are kind of, I don't know, they're kind of done with platforms as they are. They kind of find everything deficient, and so that's not necessarily the best reason for somebody to run into something else. One of the issues in this particular bit, and I think it's worth getting this out of the way early, is kind of taxonomy and how we describe it, because commonly you guys are called a white label platform, but I'm not sure that's the most helpful term, is it? So how do you see this kind of spectrum of white labeling and levels of control that advisors can take away, I suppose, from platform operators?
Yeah, 100%. And I think you're right to call it out. It's confusing if you think about platforms all the time. So it's doubly confusing if it's something you think about from time to time. So when we kind of think about it, I think you've almost got three models basically, and whatever you call them is sort of irrelevant. It comes much more down to what are you actually doing in that relationship and who's performing it. So in the first example, which is the majority of interactions that people will have had with platforms, which is where you're interacting with a third-party platform, that platform is in charge of pricing, product availability, asset availability. They are in charge of service for better or worse, operations. They're also in charge of all the regulatory obligations. So all the things that sit around prod or MiFID or anything like that sits entirely with a third-party platform. And crucially, and this is a theme we'll try and draw out throughout all three of those examples, the legal relationship is with that entity. So although in practice, of course, totally in practice, the relationship is always with the advisor or the DFM, from a purely legal standpoint, the relationship between the client and is actually between the client and the platform.
Yeah, and there is a separate one, isn't there? It's not that there isn't a relationship between the advisor and the client, but that's
exactly right.
Separately papered thing.
Exactly right. So you've almost got, if you imagine, almost three types, potentially three relationships: advisor to platform, advisor to client. Sorry, client to platform, client to advisor, client to DFM. You've then got the other end of the spectrum, which is where and that's actually where we sit, which is where the advisor is operating themselves as a platform. So they have gained some additional permissions, they've taken on some additional responsibility, and the quid pro quo for that is that it's given them far more customization in what they want to do. So they're the ones determining what the proposition looks like, what products are available, what the pricing should be, should they have multiple proposition offerings. So one of the, I know you guys have looked at P1 before, they've got a D2C business and they've got an advised business sitting on the same tech. That's because they are controlling the platform, so they can determine what they want to offer. They take on some of the obligations. Some still sit with Seccl, to be honest. So we still do the client money, we still hold the assets, we still hold the custody. But in order to work with us, they've had to get some permissions that allow them to appoint us to do it. So that's really where we sit. And in the middle, you kind of have this murky white label concept. And white label, I think you can split into two parts. There's white label in terms of appearance, which actually is one definition of it. So is it branded for my business? That's actually quite trivial, and you can actually get that branding in any of the three models. So you could go to Eccentric, like Succession have, and get a white labeled version of their platform, or in fact with many other systems out there. The second element though is where that platform is basically allowing you to pretend that you are the platform, and that only really works on the branding itself. You can influence some of the proposition. You don't have any of the risk, which is potentially an advantage. But at the end of the day, the client is still signing a legal relationship with the regulated platform, which in this case is still third party to your business. So the element of control that you have is more minimal, and that's what the market thinks of when it thinks of white label. But there is obviously those two layers, because in our technology, you make the platform looks like you because you are the platform. There's no kind of smoke and mirrors there.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, it's kind of philosophically about giving as much control to the people who are best placed to make the right decisions for the client. So things like Dan mentioned, wrapper availability, wrapper pricing, asset universe, these are all part of the suitability process that an advisor does, right? So they should be able to control that within their kind of area of control and remit. What Seccl does in this instance is clearly all of the custody, all of the trading, all the settlement, all of the payment facilitation is all done kind of behind the scenes, and we probably invest about 50% of our engineering capability in making custody as slick and as automated as possible, because when that's slick and automated as possible, it just makes it much easier for the advice firms, because there's less paper, there's less manual process, there's less 20-person operations teams knocking around that you've got to get hold of, because you've invested time to automate the engine behind the scenes.
So let's talk about this control and responsibility thing here, because that's pretty interesting, I think. And certainly in our world, you get this kind of, I don't know, it kind of reminds me of the old kind of pre-RDR days a little bit, in that you do get kind of firms who've come on the platform journey. I mean, it's kind of a long journey now, like 15 years of it or 16 years of it or whatever, and 21 years probably since Transact kind of kicked it all off. But they are kind of raging against the machine a little bit, because they can't influence or control what they want to. And as a side to that, Dan, you were talking about branding and the kind of triviality of that, and from a kind of coding perspective or whatever, and from a regulatory perspective, that sort of is trivial. But I've always thought it's kind of weird that, like, you don't, if you're an advisor firm, you don't control the platform, right? But you want your brand on it, so your clients think you do. That's kind of mental. It would be like saying it's Mark Paulson Fund.
Yeah, you're right.
And if the performance is shit because some guy was drunk that day, I get held responsible for it by my clients, and that's kind of feels weird to me.
You're right. So for me, there's you want to go one or other. The middle is the minefield, in that if it's clearly a third party, then you accept that you have no control over it. You accept the service and the pricing that's offered to you, and you accept the inefficiency of that business. But to a certain extent, it is someone else's brand that's damaged by their poor delivery. Obviously, you have some contamination risk, but it's not entirely on you. If it's entirely your platform, then of course you do have the contamination risk, but you can change it. So it's in your gift to alter that. I think the one in the middle, for me, it comes back to how reliable is the third party you're partnering with.
Yeah.
And if the answer is that they're not going to get the customer service right, then all you've really done is said to the customer, hey, I'm operating my own platform and it's crap. So you've managed to like make your problem worse, to my view.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Paul kind of saying less regulatory responsibility is better. So maybe let's unpack that for a second. I'm going to come back to this control and accountability thing in a moment. But given that you've raised it, Paul, let's talk about those regulatory responsibilities and what that actually means, because it sounds obviously pretty hairy. Speaking as a completely unregulated business, I sleep fine. But all of you have got a much harder life than me. So talk to me about what that means.
Yeah, so I think it's important to kind of break down the different component parts. So if you're operating your own platform on Seccl, you're responsible for the kind of wrapper selection, the pricing. You're responsible for the MiFID reporting, and ultimately you're responsible for that prod piece, which is the suitability of the things that end up with the end client. If you look at, I guess there are two parts. One is the regulatory piece. One is the accountability to the end client, the ability to control the service that your client receives, how they're communicated to, when they're communicated to. If there's an issue with a password reset, you can control these things. You're not reliant on a third party team to provide that service. The big part from a regulatory perspective is of course the custody piece, which we still do. So the permissions that a firm has to take on to work with us are arranging the safeguarding of assets, and that basically means selecting an appropriate custodian. And it's pretty simple. When you're looking at a custodian, you're looking at stability, you're looking at financial strength, you're looking at the same things that get called out in the platform papers, really, isn't it? It's service, it's balance sheet strength, and it's price. And as a firm doing that, most advice firms are used to dealing with outsourcing, or that concept anyway, which is looking at the third party that you're helping to arrange custody and concluding whether they're an appropriate part of the value chain to be driving some of the outcomes for your customers. So really the accountability bit I see around suitability, around wrapper selection, pricing, and asset availability, for the most part will be part of the typical advice journey anyway. And I think from a regulatory perspective, the new one there is this arranging piece, which you're having to select, in this case, maybe Seccl or maybe others, as the right partner for your business. That's the big distinction, and the trade-off in return is you get more control and influence over that experience. But that's how I split it in my head. Dan, you might have a more articulate way of explaining this. I don't know.
No, I think it's pretty much spot on. The other part that goes in synergy with this is fundamentally deciding to operate your own platform isn't like just waking up, right? You do want to have a serious think about whether or not this is the right call for your business, because if it is, to get the most out of it, you're going to want to change how you're operating your broader business anyway, from the actual operations team that you work right the way through. But the other part for me is that the permissions that Sam mentioned are actually functioning very, very similar actually to the permissions to be a DFM. So there is one permission called managing investments that you need as a DFM that you don't need to operate a platform. And so there is another question for firms as well when they're thinking about this is, where does our centralized investment proposition, where does our MPS structure go over time? Are we running models as an advisory basis? And actually, would we want to move that into the discretionary space? It is actually a separate question, but it does dovetail quite nicely from an operational standpoint as well.
Okay. And interesting chat about kind of control of service and pricing. And I think that's a slight... You're right, Paul. I think you are right. You shout a bit louder with the retail platform guys if you can put a bill in with them or whatever. But first of all, not everyone can. But second of all, the type of influence I think is different to what we're talking about here. So let's get into that a little bit more. I'm going to share a little bit of the research we did, right? Because I think it'll help here. And this is about the control and accountability thing, because I want to stay on the accountability side of it particularly. So let me see if I can do this. I used to share screen all the time, because in the early days of HomeGames, used to do slides and stuff, and I haven't done it for ages. So I may screw this up, but I'm sure everyone will let me know if I do. So here we are. Hopefully you can all see a graph, and Dan and Sam and me have all shrunk to tiny little Lilliputian figures at the bottom of your screen. So this is, thank you. Cheers, Tim. Cheers, James. That's cool. So we asked firms, I've forgotten exactly how many firms it was. It's somewhere between 150 and 200, I think, to what extent clients hold you responsible for the service they receive from a platform, and how in control of it do you feel? So this is really interesting. Like 90% of firms think that clients hold you responsible for the service that you receive. Now, obviously, you've picked the platform, so you're responsible for that. But to use my typical analogy of earlier, if an other call center person has had a really heavy Sunday night watching sporting events and just doesn't feel like it on Monday morning and gives a bad experience, that's hardly your fault. And what's that? Just over 50%, 51% only feel slightly or not at all in control of the platform experience their clients receive. Really interesting. I think that 47% in this case feel at least partially in control of that, and that is to do with selection, I think, rather than the day-to-day experience. So what do you guys kind of make of this? Do you think there's a disconnect in there? And when we get into not just the kind of regulatory stuff, and I'll come back into that because I want to ask about some practical stuff there, but in terms of service, now I don't think that's, did you answer the phone in 6 rings and say good afternoon, whatever, how can I help you? I think that's things like income distributions being paid on time, reconciliations being done properly, asset values being up to date when a client logs in to see them, and all that kind of stuff. Where do you think this kind of shines in? Do you think those advisors, for example, who said they feel partially in control, do you think they're incorrect to say that?
So I think when I used to be an advisor a couple of years back, and I remember one of the bits that we spent a lot of time doing actually was, and I think this is probably where that answer comes from, is we would be quite proactive on the platforms we selected, obviously, and service was a factor in that, but also adapting to yourself around the platform, and then working in a way that doesn't expose any of the shortcomings but promotes the upside, I think, is probably where the heart of that answer comes from. So let's say you've got a platform that has a slightly funny way of doing something. If you go on and you have adapted your business to make sure that every day you're checking income payments or whatever, then that does give you an element of control of the end service that the client receives. So I think from my perspective, that's probably where that's coming from. The bit I think that is interesting when we talk about service is it isn't just about answering the phone and answering problems, because that's really the second line of defense. The first line of defense is that it's worked correctly. The first line is that you shouldn't have to engage at all, and you're only testing is when I do have to engage, do I get the right level of service? So I think for me, when I look at that, at the moment, it is notable that things working as they are expected is a USP, which I think is a bit crazy.
Oh, great, is it?
Yeah, because for me, fundamentally, a platform is a destination to place assets, execute instructions from an advisor or a DFM, and report to a client what they have and what's happening to it. Yeah. It is fundamentally a commodity. And any commoditized service, you should expect to A, work, and B, the price coming down over time is a natural evolution of a commodity. Yeah. I don't think it should really be
it's super interesting to me, because the reason for a lot of this stuff is that I think for the most part there's huge pressure on third-party platforms to deliver client functionality, features, bells, whistles, things that are visible, and therefore the things that get deprioritized are operational processes, which I kind of mentioned earlier. But that's actually the heart of what a platform is. It's holding assets, it's looking after them, it's trading them. And so when the way we look at things is we try and split half of our resource on that. So whether it's using APIs to automate banking payments, so they're auto posted to ledgers, so no one's having to do an Excel CAS rec at the end of the day. Once that's automated, you can provide that information in real time to your clients. You don't have a manual process or a critical piece of data on a spreadsheet somewhere. As soon as you have that off of your system, it's something you're not showing to clients, there's more inquiries, there are more queries. But if you kind of look at a bit of inspiration from outside of the sector, the thing that technology has driven in almost every sector is increasing customization at a customer level. Mm-hmm. So you can, the easiest example, you can jump into your iPhone and literally change anything you want, beyond what you need, almost too much choice. And I think the reason that, bringing it actually back to your question, Mark, sorry, rambling a bit, but the partially able to influence and control is they're not wrong, that's how they feel, but the bar's really low on what customization truly looks like in this sector when you compare it to other sectors. The level of the ability for an advisor to log into whatever tool they use and go, I'm going to customize it like this, doesn't really exist in this sector in the way it does in others. And for me, that vision of hyper customization, not just for the advisor but for the end client, is the thing that technology can deliver for the sector as a whole.
Yeah, it was an interesting thing actually. I think it was Russell from SEI actually wrote a thing about hyper personalization. It was in the trades this morning, and there's a kind of natural kind of endpoint, but finance always seems to run well behind, doesn't it? I guess when you're mucking around with people's money, maybe you let other people go first.
Well, there is that. I talk about this quite often because I actually think even within the financial services realm, you've actually seen more innovation in the banking and insurance space than you have in the wealth management space. So, if you're running a PRA regulated bank and you can innovate, then you can in wealth management as well. And there is something that's held back the industry, but hopefully we're starting to see a little bit more ambition and technology ambition as well in the sector, which is exciting. I think that's something we should all support.
There's one thing that you mentioned, Sam, that I think is probably worth stating as well, is I think our model, we don't really have clients in the traditional sense. We have partners, because fundamentally you've got to both be working towards the same end goal. Otherwise you end up in this scenario where your clients or the users of your technology are demanding endless features because actually the benefit of increased efficiency isn't something that they care about. And that's fundamentally going to be really, really difficult to drive innovation. So taking that instant crediting of bank payments, what that actually means is until 11:59 at the end of the tax year, clients on Seccl technology can make a tax year-end contribution because it's in their account within 7 seconds, straight in the wrapper, job done. In reality, if we said to people, we're only going to build client features, that would never get prioritized because that functionality is never going to be as important to someone's mind as, it'd be great to have a slightly different report functionality or something like that.
So to have we kind of even, I've worked in businesses before where I've wanted to do that, but even on a personal level, you're sat there in the room going, what should we prioritize? Even though you should be saying this, the pressure, you make the wrong decision. You go, okay, let's put out the hottest fire that's burning, and it's almost always customer driven. And so organizationally, we actually ring fence our engineering teams. So it's not a single pool. We have an operational efficiency custody trading team who are never having to deal with, customer wants this, can you do it? Their raison d'etre is automation in the custody space, ensuring that we can process, 250,000 plus payments per person in operations, all of these things. But in my previous roles, haven't done that and failed because of it. And the outcomes were poor for customers, for the business. And so we purposefully ring fence it as a company so that we can't be pulled into making subpar short-term decisions, even though we sometimes want to.
Cool. We've got some really good questions coming in. I do want to get to them. And Mark and Andrew, I see you, and also Ricky down the bottom. So I'm going to come to all of you. I just want to ask one more thing on the kind of control and accountability stuff. It's really two, but it's my show, right? So I get to ask one. The first is about capital, about regulatory capital, which is something we get asked, and I don't really know the answer properly. Is, all right, if I do this, have I got to reserve a load more money? The second is a bit more nuanced. So if I use a retail platform, let's say I use one of the big, the big well-known shops, I know, right, there's a floor full of people. It's horribly inefficient, but there's a floor full of people whose job it is to try and make sure that stuff is done right. We might call it middle office, I suppose. That there's QA, there's internal audit, there's all that kind of stuff going on, and they sort of hold themselves to account because they've got a close and continuous relationship with the regulator and all the rest of it. And I trust that, for better or worse. And if stuff goes wrong, they'll catch it before I do. usually,
Yeah.
because I'm some way down the pecking order, frankly. And having, I think, a number of us on this session have worked in platforms, the amount of crap that advisors just never see because it does get caught is voluminous, right? And I guess it's like bad stuff coming out the kitchen in a restaurant, and the diners never actually see it because it never gets there. And some does get through, and that's the stuff you read about. How, if you're a firm, is this a new kind of capability that you need? So do you need to become someone that can run quality assurance and audit on you as a different sort of supplier so that they can have early warning radars and so on? Or are they in effect still doing what they would recognize from the retail space? Do you know what I mean? Is there a like enhanced need for that kind of oversight and governance from the firm if they go down, maybe not just Seccl, but if they go down this kind of route?
So yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes, there is an additional oversight obligation. I think how I'd carve it is, when we look at things that go wrong in the market currently with the third-party relationships, you kind of mentioned almost two separate themes. So things that party faces to the regulator, which is fundamentally we're basically proxying, they've screwed up client money, they've screwed up a client payment, the trade's gone wrong, all that sort of stuff that's been done in-house. That is still ultimately your custodian's obligation. They can't get away from the fact that they have a direct relationship with the regulator for that. The stuff around technology working as it is, you know, quality assurance and all that sort of stuff, again, actually fundamentally, if you're taking a technology service from somebody, it's still their obligation. And I think it's probably fair to say that in platforms, historically, QA has been potentially stronger around the stuff they're regulated for, and a little bit weaker around some of the tech that they actually release. So I don't think that relationship changes at all. Where I think it is different with us is that the firm, so we sit to the regulator for all the client money and custody obligations, and we effectively report back to the platform all of the functions that we have performed versus our SLAs live, but also on a quarterly basis, but also any issues come through live. And for us, it's about, we report that additionally, even though we are actually separately already on the hook for it to the regulator anyway. So where the firm is really taking over more responsibility than normal, it's partly that oversight piece, but it's also more around the areas that they should be looking at anyway. So is this proposition actually relevant for my customer base? Am I shoehorning all my clients into the wrong thing, which I'm sure no one will be doing anyway, but it's all the sort of standard prod stuff that they would be expected to do anyway.
Okay, that's good. And the capital point?
So the capital point depends on the business that you're already running. So depending on your CapAd calculation, so if you're running as a pure advice business, it's likely that moving into this will have an impact on your capital adequacy. It won't be massive. The reason being, well, sorry, it might not be massive. Obviously, you can't state either way, but fundamentally, capital adequacy is there to protect the assets of the underlying client and continuing service. Because we're actually holding that underlying relationship with the client for custody, that's just our terms are inside yours, actually the capital adequacy sits with us. So our capital adequacy is quite high because we hold the client money, we hold the cash. So in a wind down scenario, we've got to be available to sort that out. Where the firm has potentially additional capital requirements, or if they have to supply any extra team members or any extra resource to maintain their part of the platform. So for example, if you have an administrator assigned to operating your platform rather than your core business, then that would be a potential additional cost to your CapAd, because you would need to continue to engage that person for a couple of months. Yeah. So when people think about it, they're like, actually, you know what, this is going to be massive. Actually, it's not quite what you think, because in reality, our CapAd is massive. Yours is probably bigger, but it's not the whole hog. It's also worth stating, just super quickly, I'm sure I'm about to steal Sam's thunder, but if you're already running a DFM, the impact could be minor to almost almost
nil. You've kind of gone through most of that already.
You already have this, yeah.
No, I wasn't. I wouldn't dare steal your thunder, Dan. I wouldn't dare. I was just going to add. I sound like a broken record a bit, but this point you made about middle office and all of these things that are happening. There is this. To me, it's there is this story. There are all of these really complicated things happening in the back that advisors just couldn't possibly understand. The reality is that's exasperated by an underinvestment in operational automation, which means there are more people and more manual processes. So if I take an actual example, and say, if you're thinking about transfers. So transfers can be a bit painful, and everyone knows they can be painful. If your transfer statuses are all live and real time via an API integration, great. Okay, we're now more operationally efficient. But what can we also do? Well, we can expose real-time status updates on every transfer at the wrapper and the underlying asset level to the platform. They can then expose it to their advisors. Their advisors can expose it to their clients. So what that means is you're getting this kind of middle office concept is firstly automated, so it's lower risk anyway. It's lower cost to us, which is why we can pass on those cost savings to advice firms. And critically, it's exposed to the people who, if they need to go and speak to a customer about it, they've got all of the information they need, and they don't have to pick up the phone. Oh, can you tell me your status? Oh, I've got to chase this. It's all there for them. So whether that's transfers, whether that's payments, whether it's dividends, corporate actions, fund manager setup, all of those can have that same principle, which is automate, and that will deliver a lower risk and much better customer outcomes.
Brilliant. Let's get some questions from the floor. Sam's kind of cutting in and out a little bit there, but that's, it's just a deficiency in his character, I guess. So Dan, it's going to fall to you just for a minute.
He's left me with all the hard ones, has he?
Yeah, I think he has. Oh, he's back. Oh, no, he's gone. There we go. So let's go. We might as well go through them in order. Mark, not me, says, at what level of AUM does running it become viable? Now, you mentioned 150 million earlier. I'll be honest, that sounds incredibly low to me. So I've got an eyebrow cocked at that, and we've talked about this before. And so tell me why I'm wrong. Why is it as little potentially as 150 million?
Yeah, so I mean, the honest answer is it can be almost any amount depending on how you structure your business and what's important to you. The reason we came out with 150 million proxy was based primarily on a relatively high level calculation of most of the advisors we spoke to, whose clients are paying something in the range of 20 to 25 bits for the third party. Our costs are on average somewhere between 13 to 14 bips. So actually, if an IFA, if a business decided to run its own platform, made it 20 bips for the client, there's 7 bips then is allocated to them to be able to spend on running the platform. It's about 100 grand a year. There's potentially some cap ad costs, potentially some PI. There may be an extra resource, a little bit of allocation of business time. So that's kind of how the number comes up. All right. But it's fair to say that I think it's something that 2 years ago, so we came up with that 2 years ago, right when we bought Seccl. Sam and I from the Octopus side originally, right when we bought Seccl all those years ago. I think we're still not quite there yet, and I wouldn't be confident enough to go out and change that number. But the feedback we've had from at least 2 of our platforms is that actually the resource that we had in mind for running the platform hasn't actually come as additional. It's actually come as reassigned from the 3 or 4 third-party platforms they previously used. So it does depend on who you're currently using, but some are obviously easier to use than others. And depending on the blend, it may be that there's someone already in the business who already spends 60% of their time operating with the third parties. And of course, therefore, it actually is additive in the first example. So you've gone from 4 to 5, but as soon as you knock one of those off, you're back to 4, which is what you're at anyway. And when you start knocking the others back, assuming it's the right decision for those clients, or certainly the proportion of the clients that is the right decision, actually it's turned out not to be additive for those businesses. So in fact, that number could come down over time as well.
So it strikes me then, so what we're saying, that if you have AUA levels in that kind of 150, 250, that kind of stuff, but not a billion, right?
Yeah.
The key to unlocking this, is it that the firm's got to say, look, we now have one platform that we use. There might be some legacy stuff we can't move for whatever reason, assets are trapped there, but we're not going to be running primary, secondary, tertiary platforms where, Jane can use the one she likes and Bob can use the one he likes and all that. Is it, I hate the word restriction and restricted advice because it sounds crap.
Yeah.
But it's that kind of focused.
So
is that what unlocks this?
So I think, two things. We'll come back to the first one on unlocking, which I think is attitudinal, which we'll come back to. But to answer your question about, is this then the one true way? The way I look at it is, why are you using multiple platforms anyway? You're using multiple platforms because they don't meet the requirements of the clients. You typically will have a favorite, and the reason that you're not using that and you're using a tertiary or secondary platform is because it doesn't meet that client requirements.
Right.
So philosophically, if you can design a platform that meets the target market of those clients, or at least say 80% of your client base, because I think it is fair to say we're not suggesting that every single client is ever going to sit on your own platform, because there will be some clients who are in an amazing fee deal somewhere else, or who have very specific requirements, and they should stay exactly where they are, wherever is best for the client. But if you're designing it yourself and you can't design a proposition that's better for 80% of your clients, it's probably not worth doing.
Yeah.
But I don't think the bar to design something that is equal to or better is actually that high.
Smackdown. Okay.
And the other thing to add to that, of course, Dan, is that it comes back to that customization point, which is if you can log into your platform and segment your clients and allocate them different asset universes, different wrapper types, different charging structures, then this idea of the segmentation piece it kind of goes away as well, because ultimately the reason often you have to spread them around is because you can't change those things on your primary preferred platform, and therefore you have to go to your second and tertiary.
That's cool. I've got a question from Ricky, and Ricky, we're gonna do this now, and I want to show a little bit of data to help with this. And then I noticed a thing from you guys the other day, which is really interesting, because one of the things I think that, like, we don't have anywhere near enough time to do this all today, right? But there's new skill sets that come and help advisors buy this stuff better. I think there's a change in the air somewhere. Yeah. And I know that you're kind of doing some stuff around that from the press release you put out the other day. So I want to ask about that. But Ricky asks about commoditization. Do you see a bigger role for CRM systems to help with running the client service? So let me know what you think about that. And as soon as you're done, I'm going to put up just a little bit more data, and we'll have a word about that.
Yeah, 100%. Right. So for me, there is a vision of the future where an advisor selects the system that they find easiest to operate, and from that can control and influence things happening in other systems. So take a great example. Let's say you're in your CRM every single day. At the moment, the most that you ever tend to find is that the platform feeds information back into a CRM. Maybe the CRM does a little bit of work setting up clients on the platform, but that's a limitation of the relationship between those two entities. It is not a technical issue. Realistically, you could actually, so because taking our example, everything's available in the API. So we have clients that are integrating a CRM that their end clients will never interact with the platform.
Yeah.
And they'll control everything as a third-party advisor would from their CRM. So client setup, model portfolio management, rebalancing, income, because ultimately it is the technology provider's problem that clients have to learn multiple systems. Mm-hmm. It's kind of weird, right? It doesn't exist in other markets. This kind of concept of, well, we haven't actually integrated, so it's kind of your problem. It's not really a thing in other spaces. It just happens that we've got this trajectory historically. So to answer the question, not just CRMs, but almost any system could in theory be used to drive this in the future.
There's a nice parallel with those embedding directly in the API. So the reason we create all the logic in the API without the user interfaces is so anyone can embed the logic of a platform into existing user interfaces that they use for their clients or their CRMs, and the platform is entirely a series of functions that sit behind the scenes. There's no need to interact with it. So it's not 100% what we're focusing on. We like having that interaction as well, but love the idea that that's a natural evolution for the sector over the next kind of 5-10 years.
Yeah. So the kind of last kind of point to make, I guess, just before we finish off, because we're up hard in our time here actually, and I should have been monitoring that better because I've really enjoyed doing this one. So this is just a quick survey we did about what would make firms consider doing this, right? And top 3, operational efficiency. I think that's kind of what we've been talking about. So there's some perception of that. Owning the customer relationships more fully, well, we started on that. And then the new revenue potential comes down below that. And then the integration stuff is more interesting there. And blues, the kind of dark blue and that funny sort of pale blue thing on the left, those are more important basically for anyone looking at the graph. That's what's shown. So whether this supports what you were saying or not, I'm not sure, but it seems like from the firms that we spoke to, the operational stuff was the most important. And I guess the revenue, I mean, it's not far behind, but I'm kind of sort of relieved, I think, that's not number one.
Yeah.
Is that wrong? Is that a bad thing to say?
No, that's totally right. Sorry, Sam.
Yeah, I think the operational efficiency bit is the raison d'etre for us. We love it, and we love the power of APIs to change how businesses work. Mark, I think you're alluding to it. We've just launched this advisor academy to teach API usage to power planners, advisors, anyone who wants to come along, really. If I can tell you that you can have every single data point that exists in your platform in real time, whenever you like, and we'll give you the skills to do that, that should be really exciting. No more CSVs, no more Excel spreadsheets, no more phoning up and asking for a data download. It's all at your fingertips. And we want to be a commodity that sits behind the scenes, but are cognizant that the skills aren't necessarily mainstream in the sector, and we want to help change that. So it's great to see operational efficiency high up, because it's kind of our purpose as well, which is lovely.
The only thing that surprised me on the graph, to be honest, was actually the placings of 1 and 2. So for me, the feedback we tend to find from firms using us is service continuity is actually more important to them. So because service continuity, operational efficiency is the structure we tend to find. I think they're pretty close, so it's not a million miles off. But I think you rarely see clients frustrated by the experience they've had from their advisor. If you were to rank frustrations, it's never at the top.
Yeah, I think that's right. Well, listen, we are at the end of our time there. It's such an interesting space, and the thing that I love about it, whether or not it's right for individual firms that are watching this, right, because it won't be right for many, and people are striking very, very sharp deals out there. So the price thing, the bigger the firm, the less, all that kind of stuff. But I love this sense that advisors are like stepping into this different kind of world, and the technological implications of that is something that I think it's awesome that Seccl's doing, right? If other people want to do it, I'll say it's awesome about them as well. But to say, listen, we'll train you for nothing on what APIs are and how to tap into them and how to use them, that's a really good thing to do. That's a rising tide that lifts everything. So a huge supporter of that. But more than anything, we're writing about the industry reshaping itself around advisor firms, and that will be weird for a while because it has just never done it. And I think this is the sort of thing that that will help with that. So we could have got well into depth in a load of stuff there, not enough time to do so. But thank you both very much for coming. Watch out for next Thursday for Seccl's paper with a little bit of help from us coming out. Next week, we have got the mighty Robert Reed. Many of you will know Rob Reed, and we're going to jump from the platform side of things into the advisory side of things, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the ongoing issues with CII and PFS and what's going on there. So that's Rob's brilliant value, as I'm sure you know. Natalie will be doing that session. For now, have a brilliant week, and we will see you next time. Thanks again to Sam and Dan, to all of you, and Langcat.